Esther chapter 3. After these events, King Xerxes honoured Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honour, higher than all that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honour to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honour. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behaviour would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honour, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, they cast the pure, that is the lot, that's in bracket, in the presence of Haman to select a day and month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for the men who carry out this business." So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." Then, on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in the script of each province and in the language of each people all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors, and the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and little children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that they would be ready for that day. Spurred on by the king's command, the couriers went out, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. You can understand that, wouldn't you? Now, next Friday, March the 14th, is, according to my diary, Purim, and and is a Jewish celebration of freedom and being saved from getting annihilated. as part of the Bible that I read from Esther shows. You see, Esther was made queen. If you want to read it all the best, but it's a really interesting book. Esther was made queen because Vashti, the original queen, when Xerxes gave a banquet for his nobles and officials to show off his wealth, he commanded Vashti to come to the banquet to show how beautiful she was to all the people there. But Vashti was already giving a banquet for the women of the royal palace and refused to come to Xerxes' prom, just to show her beauty. So Xerxes was really angry with her and consulted his advisors, who said that there would be no end of disrespect of wives to their husbands because Queen Vashti refused to obey the king. So she should be deposed and not be queen anymore, and that Xerxes should look for a woman of beauty to be queen instead. So there was quite a lot of trouble about this, and as you can imagine. But Esther was chosen, being quite good looking and stuff. Esther was chosen. Esther's parents had died, and Esther was being looked after by her uncle Mordecai. Now Mordecai, in the previous chapters, had found out that there were two people that were very angry about Xerxes and wanted to kill him. So he told Esther, and she told the king, giving Mordecai the credit. So Xerxes' life was saved. Mordecai and Esther were Hebrews, but had not let on that they were. They had not let on that they were. One of the people at the court of Xerxes was a man called Haman. We read about him now. One of the people in the court of Xerxes was a man called Haman, who had ingratiated himself to Xerxes, and the king had honoured him and promoted Haman to be second only to Xerxes, as chapter 3 verse 1 says that we read. Chapter 3 verse 1. After these events, King Xerxes honoured Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honour higher than all the other nobles. So there you go. Higher than all the other nobles and officials. So all the other nobles and officials will bow down to Haman, verse 2, as all except Mordecai. Haman was very angry that Mordecai would not bow down to him, especially as Haman found out that Mordecai was a Hebrew. So Haman wanted to kill all the Jews, not just Mordecai. Haven't we heard this before? Killing all the Jews. That's in verse 6. And then in verse 7, the lot, or pur, was cast in Haman's presence, and the pur fell on the 12th month. So Haman went to the king and told him that there were people that didn't obey the king and should be got rid of. That's in verse 8, as we read. Then Haman said to the king Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the people in all the province of your kingdom, whose customs are different from all the other people, and do not obey the king's law. This is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. So he wanted rid of all the Jews. The king did not realize that Haman was talking about the Hebrews, so agreed and let Haman send letters to all the provinces that the Jews would be killed. That's verses 8 to 11. So when Mordecai found out about this and saw the edict sent in the king's name, he put on sackcloth and was deeply troubled. Esther sent Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, assigned to attend her, to find out what was troubling Mordecai. So Hathach came back with the edict, and knowing how much Haman had put into the treasury, to get Esther to help and go to the king. Esther was really scared to do that, because if someone went to the king without being called, there was one penalty, and that was death, unless the king held out the scepter to them. And as Esther had not been called for a while, so Mordecai tells Esther that perhaps this is why she is in the position of queen. And Esther asks Mordecai and all the Jews to fast for 3 days, and she and her attendants would. This is in chapter 4 and verse 15 to 17. I'll just read that, chapter 4, verses 15 to 17. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So you see, Esther is in trouble, or she thinks she is. Then she'd go to the king and take a step of faith. She was frightened, she was scared. I think there was a lot of prayer for Esther then, and the prayers were answered, as chapter 5 verses 1 and 2 says. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. And when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. She took her life in her hands at that time and done a step of faith. So, Esther invites the king and Haman to a feast that she is to prepare, a banquet, and then invites them the next day. Then she would answer the king's question. That's 5 verses 7 to 9. Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this: if the king regards me with favour, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." So now we're going to the banquet. Haman is still very angry as Mordecai does not bow down, and he has a gallows built 50 cubits high to hang Mordecai on. That's verse 14. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows built 75 feet high." It's we do it in feet, not cubits in this book. And ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it, then go to the king to the dinner and be happy. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the gallows built. Do you know, delighted. Someone once said, if you got to blow them in half, would it be delighted? Sorry. He has the gallows built and he's going to hang Mordecai on. But the next day, as Haman goes to the king to ask to hang Mordecai, he finds that the king, who could not sleep and had reports read to him in chapter 6, verse 1. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. So he wanted to honour someone, chapter 6, verse 6. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honour?" And thinks it's him, that it is himself, as I continue on. Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honour than me?" So there you go. That's what he thinks. The king had found out about Mordecai saving like Xerxes' life. Haman suggests that the king should have a royal robe put on the one to be honoured, and seat him on a royal horse, and have him led around the city, letting the people know that this is what is done to honour him. So the king says that is what Haman must do for Mordecai. Can you imagine Haman being told that's what you do for Mordecai when he wants to have Mordecai home? That's verse 7. So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honour, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to the one of the king's noble princes, and let them robe the man the king delights to honour, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honour." So there we go. And the Haman suggests the king should have a royal robe. Yeah, done that. So the king says that is what Haman must do for Mordecai. Haman was still very angry, and even more so, honouring Mordecai. His face was likely to be red, I would think. Just as he got back from honouring Mordecai, then the people came to take him to the banquet or the feast that Esther had prepared, and he was still angry. At the feast, Esther answers the king's question and says, "There is a man that wants to annihilate me and my people. If we were to be enslaved, that would not be as important, but to be killed, I had to ask you for mine and my people's lives." The king said, "Who is he?" And Esther says, "This vile Haman, it is him." Chapter 7, verse 6. Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided on his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Haman then gets hung on the gallows that he wanted to hang Mordecai on. That's verse 7, verse 10. So they hang Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. So the Jews were told that they could defend themselves and not be killed, and they were free, and Purim would be celebrated, as we would celebrate Christmas. That's chapter 9, 22 to 26. That's the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and at the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote to them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the cure, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back on his own head. And that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pure, because everything written in this letter was because of what they had seen and what happened to them. So, the days of Purim, which is celebrated next Friday on the 14th. And it's going to be a full moon as well. So, after the next hymn, we will be celebrating communion. And this was a time when we remember that Jesus was flogged and had a crown of thorns pushed on his head, and then crucified, and had a spear thrust up from his side into his heart after his death, so that we need not go to hell like Jesus went through hell because of this, and showed that we need not go to hell because of all this that happened to Jesus. And he rose again on the third day to show that we can have a place in heaven. So, if you haven't done so, come to Jesus now. Esther had to take a step of faith, and the scepter was held out to her. She was scared. Are you scared of coming to Jesus? Don't be. Jesus will not turn you away. Because of Haman's wickedness, he was hung, and so was all his sons. Our sin is just as bad as Haman's. But Jesus took our wickedness and our sin on the cross. The answer: turn to Jesus now and celebrate the freedom that Jesus gives. All the Jews were saved. Are you? Are you saved? Are you? We'll leave it at that.